FreeFall Magazine acknowledges that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the people of Treaty 7, which includes the people of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani, the Tsuut'ina First Nations, the Stoney Nakoda Nations, and the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. Thank you.
Tied to a romance with a lifelong design, backward and forward, racing through time. From a rocking horse memory to rocking chair dream, she is the best thing he's ever seen. Ain't it funny how a memory will subtract the pain and come on so gently like a slow-moving train? Though hard times were plenty and trouble came too, he is the best thing she ever knew. God takes him higher than he's ever dreamed. She takes his hand whenever he screams. Don't know if he could have made it alone. She is the best thing he's ever known. Your hand in my hand, walking along through pastures of plenty down dusty roads. My heart's beholding to your heart's sea, for letting me love the best there could be. God takes me higher than I ever dreamed. You take my hand whenever I scream. Don't know if I could have made it alone. You are the best thing I've ever known. You are the best thing I've ever known.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. This evening, we launched FreeFall Magazine's Volume 31, Number 2, our contest issue. We want to acknowledge everyone who entered the contest. We appreciate that you chose us to share your work with, and whether you were a first-time submitter or you're an old hat at this, keep going. Tonight, you will hear some of the contest-winning writing as selected by Natalie Meisner, as well as a few of the poems from the shortlist. Musical entertainment is by Roland Mackenzie. And though we miss your faces and the energy of the bookstore, the one thing I have come to love about the video launch format is that we have the inclusion of writers from all over Canada, and tonight is no exception. Tonight your reading selections will come from across the whole country. So without further ado, sit back, relax, and on this gorgeous fall evening, enjoy the show.
Hi, I'm Matthew King, and this is the first time that I've ever done a poetry reading on recorded video, and it turns out that no matter how many takes I do of it, it's still going to feel really weird, and probably be full of hesitations and I don't know what. So I apologize for any and all of that in advance. I'm here in the country north of Belleville, outside of Marmora, Ontario. I guess, first of all, I want to thank FreeFall Magazine for putting on the contest, and especially this year's judge, Natalie Meisner, for selecting my poem, which still seems really unreal. So thank you very much for that. I also want to give a shout out to the gang from the First Tuesday Muse series of poetry readings in Tweed, Ontario, which happened at the now late lamented Tweed's Mirror Hotel, which burned down a while ago. So I would definitely not be sitting here doing this now if not for those poetry reading nights, which got me back into writing poetry regularly after a series of long hiatuses. So thanks to all of you from the First Tuesday Muse. I also want to say, before I read my poem, before I did this, I was looking at a video of last year's launch, and I was blown away by the last words that were read by last year's poetry winner, Carol Harvey Stesky, from a poem that was on the short list, not the winning poem, but the last words that she read last year were these: "Even our own body parts abandon ship on the regular." Even our own body parts abandon ship on the regular. And I was blown away by that because the poem I'm going to read now resonates so much with those words. And it reminds me of how at those First Tuesday Muse poetry nights back in Tweed, all of us would come with whatever we happened to have written that month, and somehow all of it would seem to speak to each other. You know, as if we'd all written it with that in mind, which obviously we hadn't. But it's all one poem, right? Everything is all one poem, strands of all one poem. So without too much further ado, I'll read my poem, which is called "A Two-Faced Kitten and Other Freaks of Nature." It doesn't have two heads, I told myself, like that was what I had to understand. It's not two cats that have two brains, it's one that has two faces, a born metaphor, though not a literal Janus. All four eyes are forward-facing, the same as ours, but set at different angles to diverge into a more expansive field of view. I wondered how it could work two faces until I realized I took for granted my own two eyes. Multiplying outlooks, hands and feet I sometimes coordinate, never minding heart, lungs, genitals, guts, all seemingly going on without me. But no more automatic than the words I can't think to say to myself. How many voices do I hear at once, clamoring to speak for my only face? The loudest, claiming sole possession, says that no one else was ever here, and I might believe it, but a two-faced kitten, which never knew it had to pull itself together, reminds me how much it's like any of us other freaks of nature. That's it. Thanks very much.
Hello, my name is Michael Fraser, and I will be reading two poems. The first poem I'll be reading is actually the second place poem in the poetry contest, and it's after Gary Snyder. The poem is entitled "Things to Do Around Edmonton When You're Black." See the northern lights run play patterns across eternity's edge. Watch how night skies store a wandering moon. Lose yourself in West Edmonton Mall and shops swollen with the absence we all hold on to. See Parkdale elms clap leaf-fringed hands like awnings above hushed streets. Insinuate yourself into corridors and cubbyholes travel guides can't show you. Visit your old middle school in Mill Woods. Think of the time your grade 2 teacher ensured the class God was white, and how everyone turned to look at you. Or the times you and your Cree girlfriend were mowed down by stairs. The two of you, a concept people couldn't read beyond. The way adults emptied the light around you. Touch the past frozen under newly painted cinder block walls. Glance past low portables and think of how far you've come. Okay, the next poem, which I'm scrolling up right now, the next poem is entitled Solstice. It's amazing how tight the city wears summer. In the 70s, we tried to stay out till streetlights began to hum. Even now, I can hear my father's drunk laugh cutting through barbecues. Feel the belt-lashed sun smacking my pecan skin. I can't tell you about sunburns. That's not how I wrinkle. I can't go to the gym or run outside when asphalt chars beneath me. This heat makes buildings grow palm fronds from their footings. Even inside, I sweat like a bad lie. Varieties of red populate 1 a.m. fast food spots, and my stomach's metabolism responds angrily without me. The road home strolls through moonshadow galleries. Deep down, I think everyone's scared of the dark. It's what we all fade into. The city coughs up streets at intervals. Snooping steep over my shoulder, night begins the year's daylight decline. Okay, before I sign off, I would just like to thank Crystal McKenzie and all of the wonderful people at FreeFall for publishing me and publishing everyone else. I know all the hard work you guys put in. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And enjoy the reading and enjoy your night. Good night.
Drumheller. Teenagers with shiny new pocket knives drive Daddy's borrowed truck, the pickup with the wobbly wheels, to the lake just outside of town. Beer cans clatter and cling, metal rims and caps tap asphalt, roll into the ditch, and wait for labor workers to pick them up all on the clock. These teens are intent on whittling wood, stripping it down, bearing old oaks with initials of relationships intent on only lasting 1, 2, 3 years maximum. Inside, beetles have long since scratched their own love notes into the bark, but no one notices these. Tilt your head back and let the robins sing their songs and flutter to follow the near-silent droll while earth fractures, splits, opens. Tulips bleed through dirt.
I return from work to find Micah in the living room. "Mom," he says, his thin brown face pinched and fierce. "I have a rehearsal tomorrow." "I told you it's not a good idea." "Well, I think it is." His eyes hold me, challenge me, consume me. "It means so much to me, Mom. I'll be careful, I promise, but please let me do this." My chest tightens as I watch my boy slowly becoming a man, the years unfolding before me. I have delayed my dreams because I fell for Devon, because I believed his empty words over the ones in my textbooks. I have sacrificed so Micah can still have his dreams. "Yes," I say, "you can sing in the concert." "Mom, you're the best!" He launches himself at me, wraps his arms around me. "Are you crazy?" my father thunders when Micah and me put on our jackets to leave for rehearsal. "You're exposing that sick boy to germs, bringing them home to us." My mother chimes in softer tones. "Are you sure it's safe?" I gulp back the bubble of rage bursting in my chest. This is the woman who shouts, "By the blood of Jesus we shall be protected!" as she drives unseeing through blizzards to the church, who marched with a bucket of Bibles into the roughest part of Spanish Town on her last trip home to Jamaica, because God had called her to be a fisher of men. The Son of God is worth it, but my son is not. There's social distancing and we have hand sanitizer, I say. You are shirking your duty as a mother, my father proclaims. Then he adds, I am disappointed and disgusted. They are the same words he spoke when I broke the news of my pregnancy. And then, as now, the words cut deep into my soul, twisting into me like the nails that pin the cross to my bedroom wall. I hustle Micah through the door before the scene can further escalate, but the damage is done. Why is Papa so mad, he asks, his eyes now mournful, but so recently flashed with hope. My own decision is forming as blossoms sprouting from a twig. If my son is becoming a man, it is past time that I become a woman. I must pull my feet free of the mud of guilt, fear, and hopelessness that has kept them planted in my childhood home years after I should have left it behind. I must uproot and transplant myself to allow my branches to spread, my leaves to uncurl, to provide proper protection to my young sapling. We cannot grow in my father's house. Kai, I ask, how would you feel if we went to live with Paul? If I quit my job and study online? Would Paul be my dad? No, you have a dad. But Paul wants to be your friend. I want Paul to be my dad. I like Paul. From the beginning, I told Paul, I have a son, and he comes first. Paul said, of course, I would expect no less of a good mother, but I can help with that load on your shoulders. I'm in, I write to Paul, as I wait in the car while Micah rehearses. I'll tell my parents tonight. Paul calls right away. Abby, he says, his voice rippling toward me like clear, cool water. I think you should wait to tell them until after the concert. In case it doesn't go well, this is such a big moment for you and Micah. I am sure it won't go well. I remember when I announced my pregnancy, how my father yelled, Eva, Jesus told the whore to go and sin no more, as my mother dabbed at her eyes with a frayed Kleenex. You're right, I agree. The day after the concert then. My stomach rolls and heaves at the thought. I know it is useless, but after Paul hangs up, I text Devon. Micah has a concert on Saturday, 7:30 St. Thomas Church. My phone screen remains as still as dark lake water. On Saturday, Paul's and my dark faces are again conspicuous in the audience. As the concert is about to begin, Micah appears at the front of the church, tiny and solemn in his new suit. His eyes flicker around the room seeking me, and I give him a little wave. The smile that spreads across his face is an image that I will store with the other pictures forever seared onto my heart. More dark faces enter the room. I don't recognize them from a distance. Then my breath catches at the sight of Devon and his mother, my mother and father, shuffling down our row. The thought seizes me that I don't want Micah's triumph marred by the anxiety of waiting. And as soon as my parents sit, I whisper to my mother, knowing my father can hear, Micah and me are moving in with Paul tomorrow. Paul jerks forward. My father glares at both of us. My mother's eyes dart sideways to my father and shudder momentarily before she pats my knee and whispers back, probably for the best. We are silenced by notes on the piano dropping into the sanctuary, and then Micah's voice is a cascade of sound pouring out above us as he sings, Pie Jesu, qui tollis peccata mundi, dona eis requiem. I follow the translation in the program. Dear Jesus. The notes of the melody fall and then rise, achingly, tantalizingly climbing to the heights before tumbling back down, only to rise again. Who takes away the sin of the world? Each note from my son's mouth is a drop of water that hangs shimmering in the air, a wisp of wind against my cheek. I glance sideways at my mother. Her lips have formed the O that they used to make when I brought home my math competition certificates. Dona eis requiem, grant them rest. I am at rest, even though there is plenty to worry about. A virus that races through pleura and bronchioles, the move, my job. But in this shining moment, all that exists for me is the music rushing forth from Micah. It is a silver river, washing over me, bathing me in all the pain and pleasure of the past 11 years. The music conjures up a vision of the maple tree that once received my prayers. My long-ago pleas and the notes that wing from my son stream together from its branches and crystallize into a ball of darkness and of light that I almost feel I can reach out to grasp, that I can hold in the palm of my hand.
Hi everybody, I'm Calvin, and today I'll be reading just a little segment from my story, Sasha Lives on a Farm. Don't want to read too much because I don't want to spoil anything, but here we go. When she wasn't on her farm, Sasha lived with her husband. She had married him on a pale August evening, which was supposed to be marked in a beautiful sunset, but was instead smudged down by threatening clouds that should have surely been a sign that this was, in fact, a terrible mistake. But there were petunias in her bouquet, Christ above her head, and liars in the crowd. So she joined them through performative tears and vows and a kiss and a smile and a good fuck and a honey that was great, and waited until he fell asleep in their drag, dreary, overtly beige Mexican seaside resort to take her petunia bouquet out into the crumbling balcony and throw it venomously into waves, praying desperately to never see them again. Alas, she found them next morning, unscathed and unharmed, picked up by a cute little girl in a pink dress and rosy red cheeks, who just so happened to know exactly who dropped their bouquet in this bustling sea of miserable brides. And begrudgingly Sasha took them back, wiping sand off their delicate petals and placing them in a large vase of water, where they stood so patriotically portside the bed for countless romantic evenings of passively staring at the roof and clowning, "Oh yeah, baby," harder. And they stood ever so happily as she saluted his body, at the time rippled with monotonous hours spent at the gym or his morning bike rides through the dreary, rain-encrusted sky. And they caught her eye through every "sorry babe, just another minute" business call he'd make, as she rubbed the delicate petals with ring and pinky, trying to feel something not chiseled, christened, or corrupt. And she left her petunias to die in a vase, and returned to High Street, or Wall Street, or whatever street he took her to, with penthouse apartments shaded in roofs too high and floors too cold, where she'd sit with a cup of tea in her hand and the whole eternity above her head, as he left or came back with another 12-hour day, would masquerade on a quick smile before reappearing as he was, a man who got what he wants, when he wanted, and from who he wants. And was obviously wasn't her, which, in a sense, she already knew. Which was, of course, perfectly fine with Sasha. As when all attention goes towards a lie, it becomes a reality, and her petunia bouquet was waiting there, portside the bed. Sasha hid under the deck. It was a deck behind her petunia garden that could only be reached by scraping skinny bones and tiny hands through thorny bushes. But, being only 6 years old, Sasha would still like to scamper on her hands and knees through a tiny hole clad in bright smells and leafy bristles to reach under the deck, where she kept her mother's bionicles, mother's bright pink hat, and father's cigarettes. And under the freshly minted deck, still smelling of waxed wood and her dad's begrudging sweat, she'd hide, putting her hands in the mud, and staring out through the petunia bushes to see her mom desperately searching around for her, and while her father waited impatiently in the minivan portside the barn. It was there she hid every Sunday at the farm, waiting patiently till she could run out when nobody was looking and foster up some sort of excuse why she made the missed church again. Sometimes they left, only returned 2 hours later, to find her finally having made her way onto the deck-side swing, beaming style radiating at her cocky, "How was it?" Sometimes they stayed, only to eventually concede defeat in a begrudging sigh, and wait for Sasha's rumbling tummy to leave her tumbling back indoors, where her mother would be waiting with another wooden spoon ready, and threats that, if you ever pull out again. But mostly, they argued, tearing into each other with hurling insults that her teacher told her never to say, before eventually walking off in a feverish rage, leave her brother's dissociated eyes glaring down at his eczema-ridden knees, and Sasha's own pale eyes darting out from behind the petunia bush, hands clenched down in the mud, pale fragments of the delicate petals licking up into her tear-laden nose. She'd asked her mom if she loved her dad before, when she was tucking her into bed. Through pulled-up sheets, her mother grabbed her little hand and squeezed it tight, throwing a tiny smile on her face that said, "Yes, dear, of course." But the screaming argument that night took on another spin, ending with a slamming door knocking her cross from off above her head to lie in upside-down direction, pointing out the window towards the judgmental petunia garden and her dad's starting truck. Thank you, everybody. Hope you enjoyed.
Hi, this is Lisa Richter. I'm going to read my poem, What the Fool Remembers. A little bit of context. The poem was inspired by the tarot card, The Fool, which is this one over here. And the poem begins with a quote from the poet Philip Levine. "Let me begin again as a speck. What the fool remembers. And what if it were not dust at all from which we ascended and where we eventually returned, unable to stay on the line and wait for the next available agent? Not to earth, but to wood or air or water or fire or some amalgam of all of these. If, after all the years spent cavorting in waiting pools, coveting the accoutrements that life, with its gaudy and cavernous display case, sets up under our noses, we could turn at will into speedy little boats, each one newly set adrift on lunar seas. Would we then live, say, more riotously, break down the levees of the senses, scavenge the night-swept docks for flecks of crumbled stars, name our houses and streets and automobiles after the children and lovers, toxins and tonics both, who have irrevocably fractured and made crude urns of our hearts? How then would we coax our stubborn limbs into the fool's celestial pajamas, find the little white schnauzer whose job it is to bark and nip at our bell sleeves when we get too close to the cliff's edge, all the while courting sirens and skylarks?
Hi, my name's Dan Auger. I'll be reading from my short story, Blood Memory. How often do I visit this place? The memories I drift in and out are not my own, and they constantly drag me back to this town. I remember going to school. I remember going to the church across the street from that school. I don't remember riding my bike from the settlement to my grandmother's house. I don't remember spending the evening playing cards with her. I don't remember waking up to begin the day-long trip it would take to get back home. My dad told me about blood memory. The memories of ancestors or close relatives that flow through Indians to deliver us messages or remind us of our traditions. The unfamiliar memories that visit me are my dad's. He tells me to go back home. The persistence of these memories is a sign that it's time to revisit. Maybe I've spent too much time in the city and it's creating a disconnect from my people, he says, but I need to be here. Being here gives me opportunities that I don't have in High Prairie, but he's right. I'm giving up a lot to be here. I don't have access to family or tradition, and the old ways serve no purpose here. What use is it to speak a language that no one understands? What use is it to tell stories no one cares for? Part of me is dying for the sake of assimilation, but I survive. Since I last spoke to my dad, the blood memories have been more persistent, more vivid, and always there in High Prairie. The draw becomes stronger. I can no longer ignore it, and I decide to leave. The next day, I spend the afternoon at the Cozy Corner with a pint. I've never been to this pub before, but always wondered what it was like as a child. Walking by, seeing the neon sign encased in a rouge housing, I would imagine what it looked like. The main room had red carpet with walls draped in maroon cloth creased like accordion bellows. There are circular tables small enough for 2 people, draped in the same room that hung on the walls. Each table had its own circular shroud behind it to offer some privacy from the other patrons. Cigarette smoke permanently hung in the air, which softened the lighting and created orange halos around the bulbs hanging above each table. The only detail I got correct was the cigarette smoke. The walls and floors are painted in a matte black that looks sticky to the touch. Plastic furniture is strewn about the room with no particular seating arrangement in mind. In addition to the smell of cigarette smoke, the smell of mildew and old piss also hangs in the air. My disappointment in the cozy corner assures me that there is no reason to return. I leave the pub and make my way to the car. As I sit in the driver's seat gripping the steering wheel, I contemplate the rest of my visit here. An unfamiliar place like the cozy corner was a bad start, but I'd like to keep visiting old haunts and go from there. My childhood home is the next place I visit. High Prairie is small, and it only takes a few minutes to get to the house. I like longer drives. It's a time for contemplation and to listen to songs that somehow never overstay their welcome. A small break from the real world. I drive slowly. The playground where I spent most of my adolescence comes into view. The large poplar trees are still there with their snowy seeds strewn about the ground. At one point, this place was open with sky always visible from the patchy grass below. The small buildings peppering the town were the only objects on the horizon. Now a fire hall and an arena box to place in. The trees, now stifled, compensate by rising above the new structures, which in turn blocks the sunlight that was previously plentiful. My small detour wraps me around a small church that has no obvious changes to the exterior, but now hosts a small sandwich board advertising a real estate listing. A place of worship now being sold for the land it inhabits. A small part of me wants to take it back. A small victory for Indians, I thought. If it's still here, I'll consider it. I decide to park outside the church. Walking would lengthen my trip before my confrontation with the old house. I also want to look like a passerby upon my arrival. Enough time has passed that I would be considered a stranger in these parts. It also doesn't help to be an Indian casually wandering around through a largely white neighborhood. Strolling along the opposite side of the street, I look at the surroundings, trying to observe any changes from my last visit. Most of the houses remain the same as I remember. Variations of 70s-style bungalows or ranch houses with the same brown, green, and orange tones reminiscent of the time. The trees that line both sides of the street remain the same too, forming a large shady archway shielding residents from the outside world. While the street and surroundings remain the same from my memory, my house has gone through several changes. The familiar two-tone white and gray paint scheme has now transformed into a dull shade of blue that envelops the entire house. The trim around the windows and the eavesdrops are now painted black, a modern look that looks out of place in this environment. The old gravel driveway is now paved with black asphalt, no doubt to match the trim of the house. It's odd to see a renovation in a neighborhood that's barely changed. There's an entryway into the alley right beside the house. I make my way around to the back. They built a fence my dad has always intended to build. It's 8 feet high with slats arranged vertically, a privacy fence, meant to keep people in and other people out. I continue my walk down the alley. I find a bike leaning against one of the neighbor's fences, an old red and black single speed with Vagabond written on the frame. No handbrake to speak of. It's one of those coaster systems that require you to pedal backwards to stop. No obvious owner, either abandoned or left here carelessly. I have one of my dad's memories of riding his bike, and I want to recreate that moment. I borrow the bike. I start heading east of town, passing the playground from earlier and 2 public schools. I pass by the only grocery store in town. It looks the same as I remember it with a different name. It's a place worth visiting for the sake of nostalgia and a chance to buy smokes. It still has a strange petal pattern vanilla linoleum in it. I used to think that the linoleum was tiny tiny marshmallows stuffed together between 2 thin sheets of plastic. The registers are also wrapped in the same linoleum. The turntables being used in place of modern conveyor belts also have the same wrapping, except with the brown rubber trim that protects the edge from rubbing the walls of its housing. I ask for a pack of cigarettes, which is pulled from a cabinet behind the register covered in the same linoleum. I leave the grocery store and continue east towards the edge of town. An old farm comes into view. There's a barn that sits on a tilt, unsure of whether it should fall or not. It looks like it needs to rest. An old grain silo lays flat on the ground next to it. The silo made its choice. The barn looks over at the silo in mourning. The same style of bungalow found in my old neighborhood sits on the other side of the property. I remember the boy that lived there. He died in a snowmobile accident when I was in the 6th grade. His father attempted to jump over a snowbank without realizing his son was sitting underneath. The anguish his father felt after his wife left drove him to sell the property. From the looks of it, no one ever bothered to make an offer. As I pass by the farm, I feel a pull directing me further east down the road. Every attempt to stop is ignored, and I feel my body continuing forward. I want a chance to consider where I'm being led, but my legs continue pedaling forward despite my attempts to resist. I finally stop at an old car lying in the ditch beside me. The vehicle is overgrown with the native plant life that was there for years before the car called this place home. The car's windows are empty voids with only the rubber lining that once kept the glass secured in its frame. There are tiny specks of glass within that rubber lining. Inside the cab, the only thing left behind are metal frames that would have held the fabric and foam creating the seats. The car appeared to have been burned, but there are traces of the original colors speckled throughout. At one point, it could have been a seafoam green, but the lightness of the color is deceiving. Fire transformed this car, and all evidence of its original form is lost. With the bike left on the road, I approach the car and attempt to pry open the driver's side door. Years of rust causes the handle to fall off at the first attempt. I brace my foot against the back panel next to the door and place my hands on the frame of the window to pull it open. The door finally gives, and rust can be heard rattling down to the ground below. I stare at the inside for a while when the pull comes back and forces me to sit in the metal frame of the seat. My hands place themselves on the bare metal of the steering wheel. I look out where the windshield used to be, and I see how the car got here. So that was the first half of my story. Thank you, and yeah.
Hi, I'm Laura Zacharin, and I'm going to read my poem, Please Don't Put Your Leftover Lunch in the Chat Box. I put my love in the chat box. You could put your lunch in the chat box, but love would be better. And it takes up less space. Don't worry about space. There's an endless supply in the chat box, which keeps rolling upward and skyward, but never away. You can scroll back your love. Come back to me, love. It's clever and funny in the chat box. Even the sound of chat box is clever and funny. Don't worry, the chat box is not being recorded. Put your fish in the chat. Salmon, sardine, shad and roe, the oily brown paper, the knotted white string, the receipt in the chat. Put the junk drawer in the chat. Pens with no ink, pads packed with to-do lists, illegible. Kill your darlings or wound them and relegate them to the chat box. Of course, you can put your ex in the chat box, even if you don't trust the cloud, especially if. Put your old address book in the chat box. One man's junk is another man's. Do people use address books now? Put some kibble in the chat. Does the dog want to come for a ride in the chat? Are the fish and the fish eggs enough to pique the dog's interest? Hey, no dogs allowed. Read the bylaws. You could be fined or your dog could be jailed. On second thought, don't let your dog get anywhere near it. You just never know about bylaws, but also this cloud. Can you trust it? Keep all your pets safe, far away from the chat. Your cockatoo in its cage, your weasel confined to its exercise wheel. Everything in the chat box is gone for good, or it's in the cloud. Everything in the chat is retrievable. You can gather it up, take it home, heat it for dinner, or juice it. Add yogurt, fry it, and sprinkle it on pizza or salad. Put your printer ink and toner cartridge in the chat box. Put your banana peppers in the chat, your jalapenos, your ghosts. It was a mistake to bring them home in the first place. Put your spring sneakers, a jean jacket, windbreaker in the chat box. Put the real world in the chat. Follow it. Watch it drift upwards, away. So that isn't your lunch in the chat box? I was just making sure. Keep your eyes on the screen. That's what you're here for. Someone is talking or reading or lecturing. It's recorded. Don't worry. You can watch it tomorrow.
My name is Bruce Meyer, and I'd like to read an excerpt from my short story, Pas de Deux, that will be appearing in FreeFall Magazine. After 5 months of constant practice and continual cleaning, the Graham Academy presented its annual recital. Most of the dancers were little kids. The company was lacking in mature bodies, especially men, though Mr. Graham often auditioned lithe males he met on his nightly strolls through the city, when he said it was good to get out and walk and clear the cobwebs from his head after a long day. So, Mossy, I have some news for you. Dear Mossy, it's been a long time. I haven't forgotten you. You wouldn't know me now. I quit the farm. There wasn't any future there, and not a lot of past. Our brothers and sisters, when left to their own devices, didn't cope very well with their imaginations. You could say most of them hit brick walls. I left. I'm in the city now. You inspired me to learn more about dance, even though in reality we haven't shared a word since the day we drove away at the gas station. I still have your flower. I have the Time magazine clipping beside it, the book I pressed it in, and the book on ballet that I took out on loan from the library and promised to return someday, though I suspect the overdue fines will be enormous. I am learning to dance. We had our recital. I was spinning in a tarantella, which you're probably aware is a kind of a dervish dance of death. As I left the stage, there was Miss Perry, who came up to me. One minute I was wiping my face on a dirty towel, and the next minute there she was, shaking my hand, and asked me to join her troupe. The troupe, though, I'm not sure if you know of it, is in the East Side Etage. I rehearsed with them for 6 weeks when Miss Perry told me that Bernie Crank wasn't a suitable name for a ballet dancer. I replied, without thinking, that all my family were cranks, and she threw back her head and laughed, and I laughed when I realized that, yes, my name was funny. Why not try Bernard Loiseau, which means Bernie Bird, which is almost as bad as Bernie Crank, but saying something in French makes it more dramatic. Saying something in French adds an air of class to the thing. So that is how my career as a male principal began. You don't need to write back, but you should know that I have seen you dance as close as can be. You are exquisite, and you don't even know me. Just before Christmas, do you recall the day your male principal fell and broke his ankle, and then the understudy threw up from the flu? All those kids were waiting in the audience, the children who belonged to parents who loved them enough to pay $100 or more for a seat to let them see the Nutcracker. I happened to be walking along the street across from the theater after Miss Perry took me to dinner at a very nice bistro. Your Madame Karsnikova came running out of your theater, and I could see the panic in her face. She recognized Miss Perry and took me up and down and looked me up and down. And the next thing I knew, I was waiting stage left for you to enter from stage right, so we could dance the opening pas de deux of the dance of the Sugar Plum Fairies. I was Prince Quaqualuche, and you were the Sugar Plum Fairy. Fate has a strange way of blinding us to everything except our training and our instincts in those moments when we pour our hearts into what we love and do. And there you were, on point, making your way to me, and I gathered you up by the waist. And after the entree, the adagio, the variations, and the climax, I raised you high on my shoulders, turning around and around as if you were the sun, and your tutu reminded me of a dandelion blossom, its petals smiling at the evening light as the world passed by, oblivious to what it had left behind.
Hi, my name is Micah. I am the writer and experiencer of the slightly awkward and mildly entertaining tale of a low-grade lifeguard, and this is my story. I was 14 when I first felt it. The calling to be a hero. I would become a watcher of the waters, a protector of the poor in stamina, a beacon of hope to the haphazard and helpless, a lifeguard. All of the lifeguards I'd met to that point had some sort of traumatic life experience that catapulted them towards the profession. A near-death experience, the loss of a loved one to drowning, a spur-of-the-moment rescue at a summer camp for kids where they saved the life of a young child dumb enough to try their luck swimming where they couldn't reach. Whatever it was, their origins were inspiring, and I wanted to join the fray. My own origin story stemmed from the requirement of a CPR certification for high school phys ed, paired with a recent viewing of Zac Efron's performance in the trailer for the hit movie Baywatch. Like I said, inspiring. Maybe I didn't have the origin story of a damaged heart destined for greatness, but I was certainly ready to be a hero. It would take years to get fully certified, but I knew by the time I turned 18, I would be fully prepared for whatever hero work might come my way. On the day I received my CPR certification, I replayed the mesmerizing rescue scenes from Baywatch in my mind. I was going to be remarkable. I think I'm going to throw up. My coworker put a gloved hand on my shoulder and locked his eyes on mine. Hey, 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 he said, his voice soft but firm. That's normal. Trauma is known to make people nauseous, but you can do this. This is what you trained for. You are going to be okay. His words, had they been sincere, would have been comforting. But the mocking smirk on his face and the over-exaggerated concern of his voice was anything but sincere. He stretched out the syllables of the word okay like a mother would when telling her 3-year-old that eating broccoli would in fact not cause his immediate death. The radio crackled at his hip. Adam, it's your rotation. We need you on deck. His smirk widened and he winked. Well, shoot, that's my rotation. This one's all yours. And just like that, he was gone. I was alone. My heart raced and my stomach churned. Just me, a hose, and the medical disaster at my feet. Actual, elephant-sized human shit on the floor of the public bathroom. Inspiring. This was the 3rd time this week. Some patron from hell had started a trend of popping a squat in one of the change room stalls during the busiest hours at the pool, and then seemingly disappearing into thin air, leaving the task of cleanup to whichever lifeguard was unfortunate enough to discover the gift left behind. The phantom had never been caught. I turned from the obscene mess at my feet to look up at myself in the bathroom mirror. My scrunchie was barely holding up, not unlike myself. The frazzled mess of curls that was once a ponytail now burst at the seams of the patterned fabric that I had tied it up with 8 hours earlier. My black fanny pack rested loosely atop my hips, barely holding up the new radio clip to its side. This was the 8th of a 9-hour shift. My uniform had mystery stains splattered across its front, but the white lettering still shone brightly against the brilliant red of the Razorback fit. Lifeguard. It mocked me. I am to this day convinced that the word lifeguard was only chosen because overpaid janitor didn't make it through the focus group. I guess it didn't instill confidence in the patrons regarding our actual life-saving capabilities. In a contest for which title was more accurate, however, overpaid janitor would win every time. I had, to this point, been a lifeguard for all of 3 months and had already accrued a janitorial resume that would land me the job of head custodian at any faculty I could apply for, had I chosen to. I would have stared into that mirror for hours, steadily descending deeper into my existential crisis, but the rancid smell of human excrement was growing more pungent by the minute, and I was the one who had to deal with it. Ugh. I gagged. I think my nostrils doubled in size. I tried to look back down at the task at hand, but I couldn't see through my watery eyes, still stinging from the scent that had replaced all of the air in the room. This was my job. This was my hero's legacy. 3 months of guarding at a pool, and here was my greatest challenge yet to face. Inspiring, indeed. To become a lifeguard, you need the following certifications: Bronze Medallion, Bronze Cross, Standard First Aid CPR-C and AED, Life-Saving CPR-C and AED, Life-Saving Instructor, Life-Saving CPR Examiner, Swim Instructor Examiner, and National Lifeguard. I say this to ensure you understand the amount of training and preparation I went through to get myself to this high point in my career. To this fateful day, on the 8th of a 9-hour shift, face-to-face with a quarter-life identity crisis and a pile of human shit. At the risk of deterring you from continuing to read this account, I will refrain from an extensive description of the sour smell of excrement, the sheer size of the mess, and its shoulder-shuddering composition such that make man's heart weak and eyes watery. Neither will I go to great pains to explain to you how I cleaned up the mess, holding my breath and using an entire roll's worth of paper towel to scoop and smear the fecal matter up off the ground into the soon-to-be disposed of dustpan, and then, lungs ever tightening from the lack of oxygen as I'd yet to release my breath, running that dustpan out of the bathroom, down the hall, and directly into the hazardous waste disposal bin. No, for your sake, I will not belabor that point. I made a mental list of all of the other jobs I could apply for as I sprayed the 3rd round of bleach off the floor and surrounding walls. The bleach fumes were no doubt taking years off my life, but I would have donated those years freely if I had given the assurance that I would never have to deal with this kind of mess again. I was supposed to be at the Crazy Pool, a massive leisure center fully equipped with a wave simulator that sent simulated waves rolling through the water basin and up onto the pool's edge at the shallowest point of entry, 3 inches deep at the synthetic beach. There were several water slides, the main pool, a splash park for kids, a dive tank, a hot tub, and a rope swing. It was a recipe for chaos, and rescues happened there all the time. Every guard that I worked with had some hero story under their belt, be it a spinal injury, an in-water rescue, or a double rescue for a dad who had mistakenly, correction, stupidly, believed he could swim into the deep end while holding his 4-year-old on his back, affectionately known in the lifeguard community as hero dads, and there were plenty of them. Whatever it was, my coworkers had the stories, they had the hero moments, and all I had was a couple of fluke head assessments for kids that bumped into each other on the water slides and several cases of excrement cleanup and disposal. I finished the rinse, returned the bleach to the janitorial closet, and wound up the hose and exited the crime scene, peeling the gloves off my hands one at a time as I left. Just another day in the life of an aspiring hero. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Alec Whitford. I will be reading my poem called The Whiffle Ball. Now, my poetry centers around a fictional town called Boyven Creek, which is in the East Kootenay region of BC. It's a coal mining town, sort of like the one I grew up in. And this poem tells a story of the narrator coming back to the town after a long, long time away and going to a place and doing something that he did when he was a kid. And the poem is called The Whiffle Ball. And the whiffle ball is something that you can play baseball in a backyard with. And I think I have used the Canadian spelling, which is WHIFFLE. And I have noticed that the American spelling doesn't have the H, but I think it's the same thing. It's a small plastic ball, and it's kind of like a plastic shell, just with a bunch of holes in it. And it's used for, I think they use them for pickleball, but also used for baseball training or kids playing in the backyard, which is what the narrator of this poem had used it for. And he goes back and he finds it in Boyven Creek. So the whiffle ball. It lay at the center of the diamond we made in the backyard with the floor mats of Johnny's dad's wrecked car. The mountains wore crowns of shattered sun. The first stars struggled into the summer sky. I stepped where our feet dug the dirt and picked it up. The whiffle ball felt like nothing, but it carried the weight of everything that drove me from Boyven Creek, and which now beckoned my return to the yard of this abandoned house and the game that Johnny and I played here when we were kids. I pitched the whiffle ball into the dying light and could almost see him there, Johnny crowding the plate, choked up on the aluminum bat. Those eyes yearning for the infinite and nothing at the same time. My pitch arced, glided towards home, which lay in front of a half-ruined shed beside the crumpled car. The whiffle ball turned in the mountain air. All I've run from spilled from within. The folded metal, like a bird's nest protecting dead eggs. Glass cubes and wires on what had been the roof. Johnny's dad rolling his car high on cocaine. The mine firing him for his attempt to form a union. The mystery of why he had the wreck towed into the backyard when we were kids. The last words between Johnny and me. In that hour of the middle of the night when you are filled with bright darkness. The way I grasped for the lamp and the phone. The way we still search for meaning when there is none and we know it. Johnny sobbing on the long distance line. His tongue stumbling static about my mom. The cancer not being fair. The way I couldn't listen to him like that and hung up. The way Johnny drove his car off a logging road, tumbling drunk in the mountain air. dead when they found him in the wilderness that reaches into this town, the wilderness that spills from this yard, this abandoned house, from me. The wiffle ball met the earth, rolled in the dirt, and came to rest, empty, waiting for me to leave it there. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Shannon Barry. I'll be reading my poem, Tendinitis. Pointer fingers stabbing at keys, one letter at a time. A 1950s secretary clacking on a typewriter. Every error and click shoots a clamping, pinching, pain down arms. Trousers, buttons, washing my hair. Thumbs up, pinky promise. Burning wrists, creaking fingers, twitching biceps. A never-ending flu shot. Thoughts and tendons like TV static. Send help. I can't hold a wine glass.
Hello, my name is Joanna Drummond and I'm honored to be included in this issue of FreeFall Magazine. Before I share my poem with you, I should probably provide you with a little bit of context. I have epilepsy, and the poem that I'm about to read is about the state of disorientation that can happen after a set of seizures. Will-o-wisp. Too many seizures made me a traveler. The will-o-wisp entered on a gust of chilled breeze. My body stepped out into the busy field, a trick of the light, a silver slip of translucence curling through my skull to settle in the curve of the temporal. What does she know of me? Green grass full of children ready for races, paper numbers pinned to cotton t-shirts, blurred faces of other parents. What fragments can she hold when she is there and I am gone? A child running in the race, a daughter with pigtails flying on tiny legs and hope. Consciousness floats. Dandelion seeds are taken by the wind to catch the sun's glow, their small circles drifting. Thought disperses. The whistle blows and blows again, a high-pitched ache, her ears ringing. The will-o-wisp lingered in me for days, a creature of the forgotten, drawn to the ones who forget. She watched the children place their hands against painted lines in early spring's grass, certain of their path. She watched the parents smile encouragement, then carved a smile in me. She watched with interest the little bodies running at the edge of the field beneath the shadowed trees, the children who are not lost.
Hi, my name is Zack, and today I'm going to be reading my Sestina non-binary. On the wooden chair, framed by pernicious light emanating from the mirror, the boy hid from his face. He plastered his skin with makeup, foundations, concealers, bright shadows, and colors. A mask presented itself to the world. A girl he hoped would make the cut. No disguise worked well, no haircut, no outfit. She craved to walk out in the light of her inherent expression. Not wholly a girl, but not encapsulating all that makes a boy. Every night she stared in the mirror, colors refracting as she constructed herself with makeup. Reconstruction only went so far. Makeup rested infallible. He would not make the cut. As much as he tried, his packaged colors would not protect her. Society shone light on a body, on a boy, on the person who embodied a girl. A mask sculpted of shades of girl. Everyone could enjoy makeup, but she coveted tints that made a boy. Both claimed identity, cut from an ideal binary. Ring lights highlighted absurd duality hidden by her colors. A razor blade glinted, polychromatic silver colors leaching in their eye. To be a girl meant abandoning, eschewing the light he knew since his conception. Unable to make up with herself, to find harmony, she made the cut, and from her arm red blood dripped boy. Binaries constitute fear, fear to bitterness. Male was just one of the facets, a pigment of their life. They wrapped the wound, avoiding solitary disaster. The woman who embodied both and neither reconciled their mind and savored kaleidoscopic luminescence. Coexisting, both boy and girl. Colors fussed and blended. Makeup radiated in mirror light. They made the cut. Thank you, FreeFall.
Don't bring me flowers. Bring me compost, already in bloom the other way. A clementine peel in a stiff curl, curing a deeper orange. A juiced half lemon wigged in a cat fur tuft, dressed up as Steven Tyler, a cucumber ribbon for the headscarf. If you add more cat fur to the mix, you'll get pussy willows, cottonwoods. Listen, it's all going to turn into good soil. A compost can forgive our good intentions, housed in Tupperware like the tomato paste that never got to be saucy. I've learned that the most miraculous things happen on the sly, like the ruby Swiss chard stalk I caught fishing a salmon skin, or the red leaf lettuce that once ruffled a chicken drumstick like an ombre tutu, a little can-can happening in the stainless steel bowl. And my delight in the soft drum beat that paced my steps as I walked it all out back to the green bin. So you see what a mockery a compost makes of a dozen roses? I'm telling you, meet me in the alley with your compost bowl full, and we'll bend over together, and together we'll hang our heads into green bins, maybe even stop to smell a wild flower along our way.
Thank you, readers, Roland, and all of you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. We can't do this without your support. I also wanted to acknowledge all of the editors that work with us. They put in a lot of effort to make this magazine come together, and thank you, Adam, for putting this video again together for us. The magazine is in local bookstores in Calgary and across the country, and as always, we encourage you to shop local. Have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Roxanne has a smile. She wears it well, put together so ain't no way Roxanne can lose. Rolf and Red and Frank always hang around buying flowers in hopes for a while. One last fling at 55 with this sweet Jansen. Fantasy of Roxanne. The red light strings down in this big city bar as Roxanne makes her rounds. There's only going up, there ain't no coming down. Fantasy of Roxanne. Roxanne is a lover like she doesn't really mind. Just so hard to make friends with fantasy, distracting their